Zen Contrasted with European Mysticism. In Zen, man does not have the central position he has in European mysticism, where the unio mystica appears as the overwhelmingly blissful privilege to which he, as a human being, is entitled. He alone, of all living creatures, is destined for this experience, and by attaining it, he steps out of the state of being in the world. This stepping out he calls ecstasy, from the Greek ekstasis. It is losing himself and finding himself again, dying and being born again. What he finds again is his true center, his inalienable self, which is cancelled out and yet preserved in the unio mystica. In God, in the Godhead, or whatever else European mystics term that with which and in which the union is accomplished, the self is not finally extinguished, but is saved, reprieved, and its fate sealed forever. Only temporarily, only for the sake of the ultimate at-one-ment, or atonement, which tolerates no duality, is dying to self demanded, because God is born only into those souls who have offered up being themselves as the final and supreme sacrifice. But, once the birth is accomplished, the soul becomes the divinely empowered center from which to be itself forever, evolving out of itself like Nietzsche's ever-rolling wheel. In Zen, on the other hand, human existence as such is ecstatic and eccentric, whether we are aware of it or not. The more a human being feels himself a self, tries to intensify this self and reach a never-attainable perfection, the more drastically he steps out of the center of being, which is no longer now his own center, and the further he removes himself from it. For the Zen Buddhist, everything that exists, apart from man, animals and plants, stones, earth, air, fire, water, lives undemandingly from the center of being without having left it or being able to leave it. If man, having strayed from this center, is to know security and innocence of existence as they live it, because ultimately they live without purpose, there is no alternative for him but a radical reversal. He must go back along the way whose thousand fears and tribulations have shown it to be a way of error, must slough off everything promised to him, renounce the seductive magic of a life lived on his own resources, and return home to the house of truth which he wantonly left in order to chase phantoms when he was scarcely fledged. He must not become as a little child, but like the forest and rock, like flower and fruit, like wind and storm. The unio mystica in Zen, therefore, means homecoming, restoration of an original state now lost. And so, in order to live from the center, like animals and plants and everything else, man must go the way which negates everything in him that is off-center. In the Far East, this reversal and homecoming are not left to chance. The way can be prepared and methodically followed, above all in Japan. Against this Zen Buddhist interpretation of existence, it might be objected that the Oriental has never in his long history, not even today, fallen so hopelessly away from nature as the European. This is undoubtedly true and can be confirmed by a glance at his daily life, and more particularly at his art. But it must be realized that even unbroken nearness to nature is a long way from nearness to Zen. Nature, however it be regarded intellectually, is far from being the all-embracing truth by which Zen seeks to live. Nor is anything gained by pointing out that the Oriental, and especially the Japanese, has not extricated himself from the ties of tradition, despite the modernization of his life in the economic, political, and technological spheres. This objection misses the mark, because at the time when Zen Buddhism reached Japan, there was no question of life being modernized. So although people in those days lived in unbroken nearness to nature, and under the sway of a tradition to which they gave unquestioning assent, it did not deter the Zen Buddhist from regarding the security of existence as eccentric, as a falling away, and finally as a sin. For the Zen Buddhist, there is a falling away and a sin in the very possibility of living largely as on one's own resources. Man feels and experiences himself as an ego. Egohood leads to selfishness and self-assertion in the fate of everything that is not self, and hence to hardness of heart. He feels himself and makes himself the center, if not consciously, then in secret. This attitude tends to become more and more acute, but it need not even be carried to an extreme. For the Zen Buddhist, the very first selfish impulses of a child are unavoidable and pernicious. Therefore, it is no argument to say that the Oriental has never fallen away from nature like the European and still lives in the framework of tradition. This does not produce a constant struggle with his egohood, with the result that he is very far from living out of himself as though he were being lived, and from being lived as though he were living out of himself. The special danger is that the ordinary man is in such a state of unawareness that he does not know this, and even if he is told, cannot understand. His egohood goes hand in hand with the distortion of reality. So disturbed in his vision that he cannot see the difference between what he is and what he should be. For what he should be, and how he can change it, and how he can become it, cannot be put before him as a guiding image. It is not a different way of living, a new direction given to his everyday existence, not an image which could bring into reality. Nothing that could be achieved with consciousness and will, with serious purpose and a sense of responsibility. It is something totally different, something that eludes his will and reason and can be achieved only by a radical transformation. That is why Zen Buddhism does not preach. Sermons remain words. It waits until people feel stifled and insecure, driven by a secret longing